Hello to our students and exam writers out there. I would like to welcome you to this session where we are going to be focusing on poetry. In this session, what I hope to do is to engender in you an appreciation for poetry, but to also equip you with the skills and knowledge and confidence to go into the exam room and write those questions and answer those questions brilliantly. So, when you enter that exam room, what you don't want to do is to start scribbling and writing down those answers frantically. You need to sit and breathe. The next thing you need to do is you need to read the instructions. This is very important. You don't want to get yourself into a situation where you answer both A and B, where in fact you should have answered A or B. Time is of the essence in an exam, and you don't want to lose any of it. In our exam, in our paper 2 exam, we have 4 sections. We have our section A, we have section B, we have section C and D. Our section D is the poetry section, and it is out of 35 marks. So on average, if you're looking at mark allocation and if you're looking at the time we need to spend, you probably want to spend about 35 minutes on that section. In terms of mark allocation and time, on average, it's a good idea to spend about 1 minute per mark. So if you find yourself stuck on a question and spending 5 minutes on a 1 mark question, you know that something's going wrong and that you're not using your time efficiently. A good idea is when you are answering your questions and you feel stuck on a question, move on and then come back to that question. You've looked through the exam, you've concentrated on the mark allocations, you've read through the questions, and now you're going to begin to answer. You get to section D, but before you even start writing the questions in section D, you need to have the vocabulary with which to answer those questions. Very generally, what we look at when we're analyzing poetry is figurative language. And in figurative language, we can break it up into figures of speech and sound devices. We can have a look at it like this. We have our figurative language. Let's have a look here. We have our figurative language. And we have our figures of speech. And then we have our sound devices. What we're going to look at today, very generally, and there are lots more examples, we'll look at similes, and we'll look at metaphor, and we're going to look at personification. In terms of our sound device, we're going to look at alliteration, we'll look at assonance, okay, and we'll look at onomatopoeia. You need to learn how to spell that word. There we go. All right, we'll start with alliteration. Now, alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds. Peter, piper, picked, a peck of pickled peppers. The repetition of the P sound. Assonance. The rain in Spain stays mainly on the plain. Think to yourself for 1 second, what sound, what vowel sound is being repeated there? Yes, it's the vowel sound A. And then finally, onomatopoeia. That's a sound device that you have to learn how to spell. Onomatopoeia is an interesting one, because what happens with an onomatopoeia is it's a word that describes something, but in the description it also mimics the sound of that particular word. So An onomatopoeia is drip. It describes a drip of water, but it also mimics that particular sound. So drip, 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 drip. Can you hear the sound of the dripping water? Hiss is also onomatopoeic. It describes the sound of hissing of a snake, but you can also hear the hissing of a snake. Hiss, bang, smash, plop. All of those words are onomatopoeias. So what we have there, we have our figurative language. Now that language takes us and equips us to go into section D and analyze our poems. Now we're in section D. In section D, we have to make choices between poems. The choices we make are vitally important. And once you make these choices, you cannot change your mind. You can't, midway through one poem that you've chosen, decide that, oh no, I don't like this poem, let me switch to another poem and start answering those questions. You're going to be wasting your time. So, the choices that you make, as I said, are vitally important. Now, how do you make these choices? Make the choices based on the actual questions. So read the questions and decide for yourself, am I comfortable with the questions? Am I confident to answer the questions? And that will help you make those decisions. When you read the questions as well, read with a pen. Let's have a look. Let's go down a little bit. You read with a pen. So if the question says describe, circle, describe. If the question says give an example, underline example. If it says give one example, highlight one. So in that way, while you're reading with your pen, you are focusing yourself. And in that way, your answers are also going to be focused. Now similarly, you're focusing yourself on your questions. You also need to focus your answers. You don't want to give vague answers that are not going to get you any ticks, while the examiners or your teachers or the markers are marking your paper. So what you want to be doing when you're answering your questions, you want to be imagining ticks. Tick, 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 tick. I'm going to give you an example of a question, and then I'm going to give you an example of a vague answer that's not going to get you those ticks, and then I'll give you an example of a better answer that will get you those ticks. Let's scroll down. Identify the figure of speech and discuss its effectiveness. Let's make this one out of 3. So what you want to be doing is you want to be writing the answer and imagining 3 ticks. So I'm going to give you a vague answer. Let's give you, part of the question would be identify the figure of speech and discuss its effectiveness. And this would be what you need to identify. Let's go back to the old example of the simile we used. She runs like the wind. Okay, so this is going to be your vague answer. The figure of speech is a simile. Tick. That's right. Now, this is where the vagueness begins. This figure of speech is effective. Of speech is effective because it puts an image in the reader's mind. Cross. Why are you getting a cross for that section? My immediate question when I read that section is, what image and how? So let's have a look at a better answer that's going to get you those marks that you want. So the same will be the figure of speech is a simile. You've got that part of the question correct. Now you want to give something more concrete, something more detailed. The figure of speech is a simile. This figure of speech is successful or effective. This figure of speech is effective because by comparing her running with the wind, her speed and grace is emphasized. Now you're going to get your ticks. Figure of speech, tick, yep. And then you're going to get her speed and her grace. Full marks. Okay. Full marks. So what you have seen now is how to be very conscious of answering the questions in a solid and concrete way and giving specific examples. After the ad break, we're going to look at two poems, one by Donne and one by Guy Butler. I'll see you then. Welcome back as we continue our session. We are now going to look at our specific poetry. The first poem we're going to focus on is a poem by John Donne, and it was written in the mid-1600s, and it is called Death Be Not Proud. It is one of his holy sonnets, and it is really about him addressing death and saying to death that, in fact, you are not so incredibly scary or threatening, but once you have done your short little job of killing us, we go to heaven and we experience an eternity of wonderfulness. I'm going to read the poem to you, and then I'm going to read it again to you, paraphrasing a little, so that we are comfortable, that we understand all the words. And once I've done this, then we're going to tackle the questions. What's important while we go through the questions is that these questions are very similar to the type of questions that you will get in your exams. So note the style, and also note the mark allocations for these questions. Let's have a look. Death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou think'st thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and soul's delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings and desperate men, and dust with poison, war, and sickness dwell. And poppy or charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke, why swell'st thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. It's a beautiful and very powerful poem. Now let's paraphrase it to ensure that we understand all the words and all the meaning. Donne speaks to death. He personifies death. So death isn't an abstract, scary thing. And he addresses death, and we call this an apostrophe. Not the apostrophe that we use in our punctuation. It's spelled the same, but an apostrophe is a direct address to someone or something that isn't there. And he says, death, don't be so proud. Although some people have called you mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so, for you are not. For those people who you think you overthrow, for those who think you kill, they don't die. Poor death. It's quite derisive in his tone. Nor can you kill me. And then he says, from rest and sleep, which are your pictures. So for a little time we rest and sleep. That's what you do. Much pleasure. Then from thee much more must flow. So thanks, death. Once we die, in fact, we go to heaven and we are living for eternity. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls delivery. So the best men often die young, and what is so great actually about death is that their bones rest and their souls are delivered to heaven. So in fact, thank you, death, and you are not so fantastic. You, death, actually have a pretty horrible job because you are a slave to fate. We are all destined to die. Chance, bad luck happens. Kings cut off heads, and desperate men. Desperate men commit suicide. And you hang out with poison. Poison kills. War, people die in war. And sickness, people die of sickness. And in fact, poppy and charms. Now, poppy makes opium, so drugs can help us to sleep pretty well. Actually better than nice stroke. So why are you so arrogant? Why are you swelling with pride? One short sleep passed. So once we have experienced death, we in fact wake eternally. And death, you are no longer around. Death shall be no more. And this is John Donne's final stroke. Death, you will die. Are you ready now to tackle the questions? Let's have a look. The first question, and you look at the mark allocation, 1 mark. Refer to the words in line 1. So you obviously always got to go back to line 1. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful. So refer to these lines and identify, remember your pen, the figure of speech. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful. Remember I spoke to you about the fact that John Donne is personifying death, so you could either recognize it as personification or an apostrophe. Okay, you have your answer there. Now it asks you a question, and this is for 2 marks. Explain why the poet has used this figure of speech. So why has a poet decided to speak to death as a person and not let death remain as this abstract, scary thing that we can't touch? And what you could say here is that by personifying death and making death tangible, something that you can hold and touch, John Donne actually pokes fun at death, or shows that death isn't all-powerful, and that death is something that can't control us. Those are the answers that you can give. And remember, you are wanting to be giving 2 points to get those 2 marks. The next question, is the following statement true or false? Quote, 1 word from the poem to support your answer. And now this is what you need to clarify. Everyone fears death. Is the statement true or false? Now I'll give you a clue. The answer is in the first line. I'm going to give you 1 second to try and find it. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful. That's all in the second line. Did you find it? The word is some. So the poet doesn't say though all or everybody, he says though some have called thee mighty and dreadful. So there you would have said false, because no, not everybody is scared of death. Only some people are scared of death. And the poet certainly is part of the some people who are not scared of death. Let's carry on with the questions. We move to question 1.3. A word of advice. When you are answering these questions, make sure that you are numbering in the margin. There's nothing more frustrating for a marker to have to try and find which answer is where, etc., etc. So nice, clear answers, nice, clear marking in the margins. All right, moving on to the next question. 1.3 says, complete the following sentences by using the words provided in the list below. Write down only the words next to the question number. Here's an instruction. Make note of it. They don't want you to write out the whole sentence. They only want you to write down the words. 1.3.1. So you need to take note of that. Here are the words that they give you. These are the words that you're going to need to be filling into the space. The poet says that rest and sleep are pictures of death, meaning they only look like death. However, people rest and sleep for relaxation, and death is not final. And that is essentially the message of the poem, of John Donne's poem. Let's scroll down and have a look at some more of our questions. Using your own words, write down 3 causes of death stated in the poem. Now this is so important, using your own words. Don't cut and paste. You will not get marks if you cut and paste. Using your own words means that you have interpreted the question, that you understand the question. And that is what the examiner wants to see. And they want you to write 3. Okay, so not 1, not 2, 3. So you need to be providing that evidence. In using your own words, write down 3 causes of death stated in the poem. Let's have a look. Okay, so how do we die? We will start. Death hangs around with fate, chance, kings kill us, desperate men commit suicide, poison kills, war, sickness. All of these, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Got 7 possibilities with which you can answer the question. But you're going to have to do it in your own words. So for instance, you might say, one of the possibilities of causes of death is poison. You'll get a mark for that. 1.5. Why swellst thou then? Refer to the following words in the line 12. 1 mark. Explain the meaning of these words as they are used in the poem. Right. As they are used in the poem, that's so important. All the questions are obviously going to be within the context of the poem. So if they ask you, what does this word mean? Don't explain it in the context of something else. Always go back to the poem and see how it is used within that poem. So we know that the typical saying is, swell with pride, hey? To swell with pride. And that is what John Donne asks death. Why are you swelling with pride? Why are you so arrogant? Because in fact you are not all powerful. And that's what you would have to discuss. You would have to explain the meaning, and you've circled explain, explain, explain. And you want to do it in your own words, and you want to answer in full sentences, not bullet point, full sentences. You want to show the examiner that you can write. That's also part of the mark that you're going to be gaining. You might want to say something like, the The words "why swellst thou then" refer to the fact that John Donne is asking Death why Death is so arrogant and why Death is swelling with pride. That would get you the 1 mark that you would be looking for. But you need to have an understanding of the poem. You need to have studied the poem. You need to know the words of the poem before you can tackle these questions. Now we're getting to the end, right? And remember your time. Section D of the poetry, it's 35 marks. You've got your 2 poems, 17.5 for the 1 poem, 17.5 marks for the other poem. So you want to be splitting your 35 minutes between the 2 poems. So you're working efficiently. Refer to lines 10 to 14. All right. The poems will always have the numbers written, the line numbers written. Name 2 things that have been the same, that have the same effect as death. All right. And then we look, and you remember what John Donne, he said, find death, you have pictures of peace and rest, but there's something else, and it's better than nice stroke, which also gives us that, and that is poppies and charms. And poppy and charms, which are the drugs, and they're better than nice stroke. Right. So you would say, you would answer poppy, 1 mark, and charms. You're going to be writing a lot neater than I'm writing. Your writing's got to be legible. All right, let's carry on. Choose the correct answer to complete the following sentence. In the last 2 lines, 13 to 14, the speaker's tone is. Tone. You've got to know what tone is. Always remember that tone equals attitude. So your tone or your attitude can be angry or bitter or happy or sad, or here triumphant. You feel like you've achieved something, or victorious, you've achieved a victory. Submissive, powerless, not dominant, angry, sad, disappointed, thoughtful, fearful. Now the last 2 lines, John Donne says to death, 1 short sleep past, we wake eternally. Listen to his attitude, even to how he says it. And death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. You can imagine him saying it. And then you think, the triumph, the victory he has over death. A, definitely. 1.8. Discuss the message the poem has for its readers. Now this you're going to do in your own words, and you need to justify. And you need to justify your answer in terms of the poem. And generally the message is, what is John Donne saying to the readers? And John Donne is saying to the readers, or the listeners, death isn't all powerful. There is life after death. We don't have to be scared of death. Death's life is pretty dreary. Death is in fact a slave. All those aspects you can answer. And often when the examiner is marking, the examiner looks for open-ended questions. But the open-ended questions always have to be justified. And that again is where you're giving solid, concrete examples, nothing vague. (1.9) Has this poem changed your attitude? Has this poem changed your attitude towards death? Discuss your view. At the end of any poetry question, you're going to be asked a point of view question. Now, there is no right or wrong. So yes is right, no is right. But you will not get an answer if you don't justify. And again, your justification has to be valid, has to be concrete. So you can say, yes, it has changed my view. Now I feel less intimidated by death, because John Donne has helped me focus on the fact that there is life after death. You might say, no, this poem hasn't changed my view on death. I still believe that death is terrifying, that I'm not sure that there is life after death, anything like that. And your view is very valuable and very important, but you have to justify it. And there we reach the end of that poem. After the ad break, we're going to be looking at our second poem. It was written by Guy Butler, who is a South African, and the poem is titled A Prayer for All My Countrymen. Welcome back. What we're going to be doing now is looking at a second poem by a poet, a South African poet named Guy Butler. His poem is called A Prayer for All My Countrymen. It is written in the apartheid era, and what he does in this poem is that he prays to God that once the apartheid era is over, that people will return to ways of loving and treating each other with kindness in a way that God would bless. Now, Guy Butler, in fact, is somebody who contributed enormously to literature in South Africa. He was an English professor at both Rhodes University and at Wits University, and he was very involved in the apartheid era and obviously incredibly critical of it, and it pained him greatly. So you can see how this comes through in his poem. Again, I'm going to read it to you, and then I'll read it to you with a few paraphrasings so that when we enter into the questions, you feel confident to answer them. And it begins. Though now few eyes can see beyond this tragic time's complexities, dear God, ordain such deed be done, such words be said, that men will praise your image yet, when all these terrors and hates are dead. Through rotting days, beaten, broken, some stayed pure, others learnt how to grin and endure, and here and there a heart stayed warm, a head grew clear. Let me read it to you again and explain some of the words and paraphrase a little. Now remember, he's writing within the days of apartheid. And he says, although now, within the days of apartheid, few eyes can see beyond this tragic times. So there are not many people who can see beyond the times, beyond the tragic times and the complexities of it. And the apartheid days were horrific and tragic and complex. There were so many dynamics. And now he begins his prayer. He says, dear God, please ordain, please order or decree such deed be done, so that the things that we do, such words be said, so that the words that we say, that men will praise your image yet. Everything that we do will be in your image, when all these terrors and hates are dead. In these two lines we see some kind of image for hope that the poet has, because he doesn't say when the hates might be dead or hopefully are dead. He says when all the terrors and hates are dead. So the poet is, if you could use the word optimistic, but he's certainly hopeful that the days of apartheid will end. In the second stanza, he speaks about the rotting days, through rotting days, beaten and broken. Here we have alliteration. And what he's speaking about in terms of what is beaten and broken, it's our country, it's the politics, it's the people. He said some of us stayed pure. Some of us managed to stay pure. Others learned to grin and endure. If you remember the phrase, grin and bear it. So we pretended to be happy and we endured it. We remained stoical, we remained tough. And here and there. So there were not many, And here and there, a heart stayed warm, so there was still love. And a head grew clear. There was still vision and understanding. Which is enormously difficult in seeing beyond. So it's about sight. Do you feel ready to go on to the questions? So have this poem. Learn this poem. Remember who the poet is and know how to spell his name. Let's go to some of the questions. Remember, you have 17.5 marks for this question. And these questions are adapted from a past paper. So they are very similar type of questions that you might get. Similar style, similar mark allocation. Complete the following sentences by using the words, so complete, by using the words provided in the list below. Write down only the words next to the question, only the words. Don't bug the examiner by writing the whole sentence next to the question number 2.1.1, 2.1.2, 2.1.3. Important. And this is our sentence. This poem is written as a for all the of, and there you have. So it's written as it's a prayer. We know that from the title. For all the people. That's also in the title. A prayer for all my countrymen. Of, and it's for us, it's for the South Africans. And here you can see that it's a half mark for each of those. And then you're getting your 3 ticks. You're happy because you're getting your 3 ticks. Now referring to line 1. Though now few eyes. To whom do the few eyes belong? 1 mark. To whom do the few eyes belong? And here what you could think of is, he says, though now few eyes can see beyond this tragic time's complexities. Who during that time is battling to see that anything could change, that there can be any hope? You might say the people who are the victims of apartheid, or the comrades. It's very difficult to see hope if you are the recipient of the horror and the abuse, if you are the one in detention, etc., etc. So those are perhaps the eyes that are feeling hopeless. Now this is the figure of speech we talk about here. It's called a metonymy, where the eyes are representing a person. Eyes are representing a whole. Question 2.3. Refer to line 3. This tragic times, here we've got an alliteration. I'm just going to do a lit. Explain why this period in history is regarded as tragic. Now, as a South African, we know our history. And we know that apartheid was tragic because there were horrors, there was torture, there was cruelty, people were killed. And if you justify this question with any 2 points, and there are so many justifications that you can make, then you will get your 2 points. You need to write in full sentences again. You need to show the examiner that you are able to write in full sentences. No point form. Okay, no point form. Unless you are asked to write in point form. Let's have a look at our next question. 2.4. Choose the correct answer to complete the following sentence. Correct answer. Choose. So here we see we've got a multiple choice, hey? In line 4, the word complexity means hardships and shortages, hardships and answers, answers and solutions, and problems and difficulties. What you often find with multiple choice is that in each of the possible answers there will be one option that makes it a non-option. So A, shortages, no. Hardships and answers, no. Answers and solutions, definitely not. So what you're left with is your D. And there you have your mark. Refer to lines 5 to 9. Always go back to your poem. And it says, "Dear God, ordain." And remember we said that ordain was to order or to decree or to make happy your image yet. Explain why the poet wants his countrymen to behave as described in these lines. Well, the poet wants people to honor God, to behave responsibly. Any points that relate to how one should act as a moral person. The next question we have is read the following poem and answer the set questions. So we're on the same poem. Refer to the poem as a whole and give 2 examples of alliteration. There are many examples of alliteration. So we'll go back to the poem and let's have a quick look. Here we go. So now if your eyes can see beyond the tragic times, complexities, dear God, ordain such deeds be done, such words be said that men will praise your image yet when all these terrors and hates are dead. Through rotting days, beaten, broken, some stayed pure, others learned how to grin and endure, and here and there a heart stayed warm, a head grew clear. Those are the alliteration examples that we have. And you put them down and you're getting your marks. Next question. Second stanza. Using your own words, describe 3 different ways in which people reacted at that time. Now remember how the poet spoke about some people kept their hearts pure. Some people, we can go back to the poem and see, some people kept their hearts pure. Some people couldn't see beyond that time. Some people, let's have a quick look. And this is where it is in stanza 2. You know that the 2 divisions are stanzas. So we have some stayed pure. Some were stoical and they grinned and endured. Some hearts were warm and some heads grew clear. And as you are answering those questions again, be sure that you're writing in the full sentences. That's very important. True or false? Quote a line to support your answer. The speaker was one of the few people who enjoyed the period of time described in this poem. Already you know that it's a pretty ridiculous question. So immediately you've got false. And all you need to do now is to find a line to substantiate this. We know that there's no way that the writer writing this poem thinks anything positively of the apartheid era. So you can look at rotting days. That's something you could quote. You can look at tragic times. Those might be very good phrases or descriptions that you could quote to show that this poet in fact finds the apartheid era disgusting. We have our last question. At the present time in our history, do you think the poet's prayer has been answered? Discuss your view. This is another view, your own view question. There's no right, there's no wrong. You have to substantiate. Now I hope during this session you have a good understanding of these 2 poems. You have confidence, you have the skills and knowledge to tackle those answers when you sit in the exams. Remember the tips that I've given you and go into those exams and be strong. Thanks for being with us today. Goodbye.